Hello, everybody, and we're about to start week 3 of the Criminal Justice Administration course. So, I'm first going to go over a couple of housekeeping things before we get into our main lecture. The main lecture is going to be on Chapter 5, which is Interorganizational Relationships and Motivations. But we're going to start with a couple of housekeeping things to begin with about the midterm that's going to be this week. So, can you believe it's already time for the midterm? It seems like we just started. So, a lot of this is covered in the syllabus, but I figured I would explain it and go into more detail and stuff so you know what to expect when you start the quiz, the midterm exam this week. So, it's going to be 15 multiple choice questions, and each are going to be worth 2 points each. So, it's going to make it 100 points total. And the midterm is going to open on Tuesday, 26th, and then close on Friday the 29th at 11:59. So still due on the regular Friday like most of the stuff is, but you have that 3-day window to complete the exam, and I give you the 3-day window to complete it. So what is going to be on the exam? So since it's a midterm, it's going to be cumulative. Remember, anything that's on this exam will not be on your final, so this stuff's only going to be covered once for this exam. So what's included in the midterm is going to be the preface lecture, the introduction chapter lectures, and the book chapters, chapters 1 through 6. That includes this lecture and the next lecture. So make sure you do those two before you take the exam, because that is going to be on the exam. And then it's going to be that article that I had y'all read for general systems theory. It's also going to be on that exam. So that's everything that's going to be on the exam. And once you finish it, that's all it's going to be for the rest of the, it won't be covered again on your final. So this is you'll only have to do this once. Let's see, other midterm notes. So according to my syllabus and policies, if you miss an exam period for any reason, or you think you will be missing the exam period for any reason, please email me before the exam period begins or ends. It's way easier for me to set up an alternate time while it's going on, because you can log in and check it and then decide that you have a extenuating circumstance and can't take the exam. So that's why that's there. If you have technical difficulties, make sure you email me before the exam period ends so I can reset Canvas for you so you can take it. But that being said, if I let you back in, I'm going to be checking your first attempt to make sure that it was a technical difficulty, because on my end I can see all your tracks all your logs and clicks and stuff, so I can see if you actually did lose internet connection or something else happened. So make sure it's actually a technical difficulty and not just because you looked at the exam and decided it was too hard and you wanted to wait and have another attempt, because I can look. Additionally, the midterm, like I said, is open book, but it is timed. You have an hour and 20 minutes, I think, and that is about the length of the class if we were sitting in the in-class time. If it was face-to-face, a class would last an hour and 20 minutes, so that's how long you have to do the exam. And it's 50 questions, so that gives you plenty of time to do the exam. It's open book, but like I said, it is timed. You only get one attempt to do it, so once you start it, it's the only attempt you get. I'm not going to require you to do lockdown and honor lock and everything, so I'm going to trust y'all to be able to take the exam responsibly like you would in a face-to-face class. Like I said, it is open book because I can't really keep you from cheating or anything because it's an online class. So I'm not going to require honor lock and stuff like that, but if there's a lot of issues with this first exam, I might have to on the second one, but we'll see. So just please, I'm going to trust y'all to do it the way, because y'all are all juniors and seniors. Just take the exam like you would, give it just as much effort as you would any other class and any other exam, face-to-face or anything like that, with the addition that it is open book and you can go back and look at your notes at the same time. So that's what that was meaning. So in addition, like I said in the syllabus, there is an extra credit opportunity for this midterm. You get until the end of the week, the midterm period's Friday, to turn it in. There's a survey link on the assignment page where you turn it in. It's just a survey, monkey survey, giving me some feedback about the course, what's going well for you, what isn't, how am I doing, what can be improved, that kind of stuff. And it's going to be very helpful for me, especially right now, because if I see something that everybody's struggling with, I can try and fix it before the class ends. So like the next couple of weeks will be easier. So that's kind of what I'm doing it for. That, and like I said, I'm a newer instructor, and I want to have feedback to improve how I'm teaching and how I'm delivering this stuff to you. And it would be very helpful for me to hear feedback and stuff about my course design and stuff like that. So since I am a PhD student and will be doing this more often, it would be nice to have some feedback. So I made the survey completely anonymous. You don't have to tell me your name or anything in it. All you have to do is screenshot the last page or the confirmation page, whatever the last page is that you are given. Screenshot it. You can put it and leave it as a picture. You can put it into a Word document, whatever, it works. But upload it up into that assignment on Canvas, and I can give you 5 points. So if you do that and send me the confirmation, I'll give you 5 points for your midterm. So that's an additional 5 points. And it's only going to be applied to your midterm. It's not going to be applied to quizzes. It's not going to go to your discussion. It's only the midterm. And I'm going to give you one more opportunity as well for the final exam to do the same thing again. So there'll be another opportunity to get another 5 points for your final exam. So be on the lookout for that. So that's what the extra credit opportunity is to, it's just to give me more information and to help me better the class and help y'all. And I'm kind of excited to see how your feedback and understanding and stuff like that would be useful. So that's what the extra credit is, and I gave you information about the midterm. I'm going to try and set up a lecture. I might put it on the next one, I don't know yet, about the article critique, to go over the handout and the information on the handout a little bit more in detail. That might be helpful. So I'll make a note to do that as well, to cover the next stuff. But that is the stuff on the midterm and about the extra credit. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about the actual material for the day, the lecture for the day, which is going to be on your interorganizational relationships. And that's what this chapter is going to be on. So we're going to start with that and go over some of that today. So first, we're going to define what an interorganizational relationship is. So the book defines it as a cooperative partnership between two or more organizations in order to achieve a common goal. And this is the very general definition, super general. So the book also mentions this, and I found this kind of interesting, is some people have been deciding, scholars and academics in the field have given it, CJ for criminal justice specifically, they changed the definition a little bit and say that an interorganizational relationship is going to be defined as a partnership consisting of one criminal justice agency and then one community organization, and they're working together to achieve a shared goal. So you can think of it as the police department, the Tallahassee Police Department is working with an organization in the community to further some goal they have. That would be an example of this. So that makes sense why it would be because they're going to be each an organization and they're working together. So that's what that would be. So these interorganizational relationships, they are going to help organizations to reach beyond boundaries. So getting resources that they need and continuing to grow bigger and better. So that's what they're usually for. They're beneficial, not beneficial. They aren't going to hurt them. Another thing to mention in this, I may switch the terms around. I may say interorganizational and I may say IO or just relationship, but it means the interorganizational relationship. So if I say IO or relationship by itself, that's what this means. It's just all to go back to this. So goes back to the interorganizational relationships. Just in case you see it in a different term, that's what that means. So we're going to continue on to levels of commitment in interorganizational relationships. So organizations can vary on levels of commitment to their relationships. And you can see that these are going to be based on degrees of formality. So what that means is like how formal they have to be with each other and how committed they are. And you're going to see that in the next couple slides, say, like a continuum, a scale of how formal and commitment it's going to be to each other. So it can also vary in terms of like integration, formality, like we said, accountability, so being accountable to each other, as well as abilities to implement change. So making change because of this relationship. So also important to note, organizations themselves are going to be likely to choose the simplest structure to manage being dependent on each other. So they're going to find the easiest and simplest option to manage their relationships. Which makes a lot of sense, because why would you put in a ton of effort and only get very little in return? So that kind of makes sense. They don't want to make it too difficult, or else it's not really worth it in the long run. So with that being said, we're going to go into this levels of commitment in organizational relationships. And this was first, the idea in the book was brought on by Himmelman, and that was in 1996. I give you dates, but they're not really that important. It's just, when I take names, I always am instinctually put the dates beside it, because I'm usually talking about a specific work. So that's just a little peeve of mine, is I always put the date. You don't need to know the date. You may need to know the person, but you don't need to know the date. I just include it. I noticed on my slides that I do that a lot. I include a date when it's not really that relevant. Anyways, so the framework of the book we're going to talk about was from Himmelman in 1996. And he says that the partnership process builds on a continuum of commitment and complexity. So this is that idea of commitment, complexity, and then formality. So in the dimensions that he included in his continuum was going to be networking, coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. So this is a lot of C's, apparently, COs. So it's going to be a little bit, make sure you can differentiate between coordinations, cooperation, and collaboration, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But everything starts with a C for some reason here. All right, so the first one is going to be your networking. And this Himmelman states that this is the lowest level of commitment between people, and it is the lowest level of formality. And it involves exchanging information for a mutual benefit. So, which makes sense, because when we think of networking, we're networking as individuals, not as organizations. And that's kind of what the informality means. In this case, is you're interacting with like organizations in terms of like making contacts, and you want to make contacts and find other people who are doing similar things to you. And you know that's important in like finding jobs and stuff like that, is your networking and stuff like that. So that's one of the first things in this continuum that he talks about, is how organizations can network with each other. So that's how I think about it. Okay, next one is going to be coordination. So coordination involves more involvement, so more commitment and formality than the networking does. So it involves exchanging information, which is the definition from networking, and altering activities for the mutual benefit to achieve a common purpose. So we're adding on to the original definition of networking by saying that they are altering activities. So that's the main part of the coordination aspect of this, is this idea of altering activities for the mutual benefit of a shared goal. So for the next two parts of the continuum, they're going to add on to different pieces of this main definition right here. So keep an eye on which part goes where. So that's what that's going to mean. So coordination also could result in organizations changing their activities. So that's what that altering activities part means. So think about it like them changing their changing their plans after hearing about this new risk-taking procedure, risk needs assessment thing. So I thought of an example that may help here. So examples of coordination between two organizations could include like sharing informations, such as program implementation, and that may result in the organization deciding to change how they implement a program based on what the other organization is doing. So, say two county jails, like Leon County and some other county, they're interacting with each other and learn that Leon County uses this specific tool to do risk assessment, but this other county doesn't do it. So once they hear about the Leon is using this one, they decide to use this one. So then they coordinate and decide to use the same program. So that would be an example of a coordination here. So cooperation. It differs from coordination because formal agreements may involve. So there may be contracts and stuff like that, and joint ventures and stuff, and joint stuff, partnerships. And this is like formal contracts and stuff like that. They also are going to differ because the organizations may start to contribute their own resources. So they're going to give out their money, their inputs, technical aspects, all these different things that they have that are proprietary to them in order to achieve something together. So it could be altering and sharing resources. Like I said, in order to achieve that common purpose or their common goal in this case. And things they could share includes like human resources, people. They may share people, like liaisons or something. They could share technology, financial resources, all that kind of stuff they could share with each other. In this case, they can also share data elements, so that is included as well. So if we're continuing on with our example earlier with coordination, they could share the same assessment tools, like I said, with that risk needs assessment. They could share it, share the data that they find on it with each other. And that would be an example of that. So the last one that we're going to talk about is collaboration. And this is the highest degree of formality and commitment that there could be. So it involves enhancing each other for the mutual benefit of a common goal. So essentially that means is they are making each other better in order to achieve this common goal together. So that's that part that differs from the other types, is that they're trying to better each other and not just reach a goal, but better each other and reach a goal. So those are going to be Himmelman's his continuum of his framework. And remember, that includes networking, coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. So the next thing we're going to talk about a little bit is going to be motivations for relationships. And this is what idea we're going to talk about for probably the rest of this lecture. Now, motivations for relationships, there's going to be a lot of motivations. So it's not to say that there's one distinct motivation, but there's going to be a lot. So in criminal justice organizations need to get resources from the environment. So they have to partner up in order to do so. These resources could include like legitimacy, authority they need to get from the environment, even resources like finance, like money and funding. So that can come partnerships. They want to put a partnership because it involves funding, like federal funding, which we're going to see later. So people who study motivations for these relationships, they study the interactions between different organizations. And they have done so by looking at it at the systems level. They also have looked at it at the organizational level. And remember when we talked about it in the last couple lectures about the levels of analysis. So your systems level would be overall, which is your macro. So looking at it like a bird's eye view from the top, very top, broad, versus your organizational level, which is going to be meso, or the middle. So I included those so it links back to your ideas from previous lectures. So we're going to go into some motivations next. So we're going to start by talking about institutional theory. So criminal justice likes to rely heavily on this theory to explain criminal justice organizations, and the text doesn't approve of this very much, so they're going to give you a different view. But I feel like it's still important to talk about for a minute. So institutional theory basically states that organizations are more likely to become similar to each other than they are to become different from each other. So they're more likely to make themselves similar because it's easier to retain like similarity and stuff like that, and authority and legitimacy when they are similar to each other than when they're different from each other. So that's what institutional theory in general is talking about. Now, like I said, the book doesn't really focus on this too heavily. I'm not entirely sure why they don't, but they talk about it in like in examples and stuff like that, and they say that there's not just one singular theory that explains why organizations are gonna make these relationships. So it's kind of like your chronological theory class. You learned a lot of different theories for why people offend, but not just one. There wasn't just one like perfect theory that explained everything. That's like the big kahuna. There's so many different types of theories, and not just one will explain everything. So that's what they're kind of getting at here, is that institutional theory cannot explain it just by itself. They need a lot of others. So they're making that metaphor in the book is how it's similar to crim theory, is that there's a lot of theories that could explain this one thing. So, and then they're going to talk about these contingencies, and there are going to be 6 contingencies. And this was by Oliver in 1990. Which combines a bunch of these other theories, such as like the institutional theory and others, in order to explain the motivations for why organizations are gonna want to make these relationships. So Oliver created this framework to learn more about what motivates an organization to create a relationship with each other. And it's going to, like I said, it's going to draw on a lot of different theories. You probably haven't heard about many of these before, but the overall premise is not really that important for what these are. Just remember that as those go into this. So I'm not going to spend too much time covering what social exchange theory is. Try this one, cost theory, dependence theory. I'll give a little bit of definition, but not too much, because I'm not too focused on it. I wanted you to focus more on the contingencies, not the theories that are involved within it. So it draws on these theories, and then also institutional theory, to make a framework. And it's going to have 6 contingencies, like I said, that motivated organizations to create relationships. And this includes necessity, asymmetry, reciprocity, efficiency, stability, and then legitimacy. Can't even say that today. Legitimacy includes that as well. And we talked about legitimacy earlier in the semester as well, too. So before we're going to cover necessity here, but big thing is determining whether it is a voluntary relationship or a mandatory relationship. So the only one that falls under the mandatory relationship is going to be necessity. And this necessity idea refers to the fact that some interorganizational relationships are required and mandated by legal statutes or regulations. So these relationships are required to happen because of a statute. So CJ organizations can be affected by these mandatory relationships in different ways. And this is going to be different than other non-criminal justice organizations. So my example for here in terms is like prisoner reentry and like offenders when they re-enter society. There are a ton of statutes that limit what they can do. So like they can't vote, they can't vote, they can't sit on a jury, they can't have public housing, stuff like that. Or is an example of relationships that's going to be, they have to have so it includes like parole, like you have to have that relationship with a separate entity like the jail has to have and the courts have to have that separate relationship with somebody, with an agency that does parole, or an agency that does probation, or does drug testing for offenders out on probation. They need somebody to drug test, which is a different organization. So they have to have, and those are mandated by statutes. So they're required to have these relationships versus they want to have them, they have to have them no matter what. Or else they may face like legal repercussions from it. So that is the only one that falls under the mandatory category. The rest are going to be more voluntary based. So for voluntary relationships, we're going to start by talking about resource dependence theory. And simply put, resource dependence theory is used to explain strategies that are created in response to problematic environments. So like when there isn't any, like there's scarce resources, like it's hard to find resources, if they're in weird environments, like maybe like right now with the economic downturn would be an example of this, falling under this. So they can be used to explain desires to increase power and reduce dependence on other organizations. So they want to increase their power, but they want to stay independent of each other. So when we're talking about Oliver and these 6 contingencies, 2 of them are going to be derived through the resource dependence theory, and that's going to be asymmetry and stability. So both of these fall under this idea of resource dependence theory. So we're going to talk about asymmetry first. So asymmetry refers to the desire to create a relationship when it's driven by, the motivation for driving this relationship is self-interest. So like selfishness, that's why they're going for it. They are motivated to strategize so that they can exploit opportunistic situations by limiting resources for other people to get to. So limiting resources for their competitors, or to obtain resources that they need before somebody else does. So that's kind of what asymmetry means here. So this concept can also like directly influence how they structure their relationships. Power is going to be an example here, and I'm saying that this comes from the book as well, and talks about how power is symmetrical or decentralized if the decisions are made without considering the rest of the organization. In addition, power is also more asymmetrical if one person makes decisions and controls the rest of the actions, so that he has more power. So it makes it asymmetric. Like the power is not symmetrically applied throughout the organization. It's held with one person, so he carries all the weight. So it's asymmetrical. That's how I thought about it. Anyways, so next slide, we're going to give an example of asymmetry, especially in a criminal justice related example. So think about agencies that are looking for more funding at the federal level. So they're looking for the government money and resources, and they want more funding to implement programs or to like assess programs, stuff like that. So they need the money to do it. So they need grants. So they apply for grants and they get one from the federal government. So then they have other issues. So when a project is federally funded, the federal level, so the government can influence the structure of the relationship. So they can determine how the relationship is because they're giving them the money to do this, the money that the organization needs to do these program assessments and stuff like that they need the money for. So that grant could also force organizations to share their decision-making power with the government. So because they're giving an organization this money, they now have decision-making power of what happens. They also can be influenced by policing powers. So if there's funding involved, it could influence policing and who can police with the funding power. So that's an example, kind of, if you think about funding, and if a agency goes in and tries to get funding, but then they're stuck with the government trying to decision make and hold power over them because they took money from them. So that's kind of what a good example of asymmetry is, at least in a criminal justice related context. So the next one we're going to talk about is stability, and this is pretty simple. It's just the predictability of making a relationship. So they're creating a relationship in response to uncertainty or not knowing something, and a lot of times organization will make a relationship in order to reduce uncertainty. So they're doing it because they want to reduce the uncertainty or the unknowing. So that way, they take a look at it in a different direction. So they make a group in order to defend themselves from uncertainty. So that's what stability means. They want us to remain stable and not uncertain. So the next one we're going to talk about is reciprocity. And it refers to the fact that organizations may be motivated by cooperation to achieve a similar goal. And this kind of it stems from exchange theory, which simply means that relationships are created to be equitable and mutually supportive. So they don't want them to be dominated with each other and issues like that. So that's what exchange theory means. They want to create equitable, like equal relationships that support each other, not dominate. So, like I said, the organizations are going to be motivated by cooperation to achieve a goal. So if one helps one, the other one has to help them. So like you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of thing, idea. And this kind of goes without saying, but sometimes it's worth saying, is like relationships are more likely to occur when organizations share a common domain. So if they share the same like resources and services and stuff, if they all are going for the same thing, they're more likely to create a relationship. So if they're all trying to reduce crime, then they're more likely to group up and make a relationship, versus if one is trying to reduce crime and the other one's trying to, or one is trying to like incapacitate and put more people in jail, versus the other one is trying to decrease the population in jail. It's kind of two opposing goals, so they won't they won't create a relationship if there's opposing goals. There's no point in it fighting with each other. So that's kind of what that would be. So the next one's going to be your legitimacy, and we talked about this earlier in a couple lectures ago, but we're going to further it here some. And this idea, this part of her Oliver's contingencies, it kind of is derived from institutional theory, like we talked about earlier. So criminal justice partnerships are going to rely on whether organizations are perceived as legitimate to provide services. So they want to have and keep legitimacy and authority. So it's a perception or assumption that actions of an organization are going to be desirable and or appropriate. So, and they're looking for the authority to stay invested in a person or organization in order to exercise the power and perform a function. So that is basically what the legitimacy means in this context. And the last one we're talking about is efficiency. And this is going to be derived from transactional cost theory. And essentially it is like organizations are going to be motivated by the considerations of efficiency. So they want to be more efficient. So partnerships may be used to reduce cost, to lower their cost, making cost, lower overhead, oversight. They're going to do it to reduce some of their costs that they have. So that's kind of what that means. So those are the 6 contingencies from Oliver. That was from Oliver. So we're going to do a quick recap before I end this lecture, just to go over a couple things. So we started our lecture by talking about the midterm and what's going to be included on that midterm. So that midterm is going to open on the 26th, and you have until the 29th to complete it. You get 1 attempt, and it's open book. If you run into issues, please let me know as early as possible, so that way we can work out something and figure something out together. So there's also going to be that extra credit opportunity, and that is that survey that allows you to give feedback about the class and how the class is going. And that's going to be really helpful for me to manage the class as we go into the last 3 weeks and everything that's happening to make sure, I want to make sure everything's going okay, and giving me feedback because, like I said, I am a newer professor or newer instructor, and I'll be doing this more often, so I want to be able to get feedback and improve upon it. And then we talked about the lecture material for the day, which is chapter 5, and we talked about what organizational relationships are, and levels of commitment, which included your networking, your coordination, cooperation, and collaboration, and that was all included under Himmelman's framework. So we talked about each of those and how it's a continuum of commitment and formality and complexity. And then we talked about motivations for creating these relationships, which included talking about the 6 contingencies, and that included necessity, asymmetry, reciprocity, efficiency, stability, and legitimacy. And we talked about both mandatory relationships and then voluntary relationships as well. So that's briefly what we covered today in a quick 30-second rundown what we talked about today. So there's going to be another lecture for chapter 6, and that'll include everything up till the midterm. So it's going to be everything for midterm. Once you watch the 6th lecture, the chapter 6 lecture would be the last one for the midterm. All right. So I'm going to let y'all go. Enjoy your day, evening, and I'll talk to y'all soon.